Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, whatever time you're tuning in. Welcome to Branding for Breweries. My name is Tim, the Brand Weaver, and here at Branding for Breweries, we are bringing the greatest minds in the brewing industry together to help you thrive and survive whatever size your brewery is. And today is no exception. I've been joined by the very talented, very knowledgeable Mr. Grant McKenzie. Grant is a marketing expert with over 20 years in the brewery marketing game, working with big names like Peroni, Asahi, Pilsner Urquell, and we are going to be ripping the Band-Aid off, or the plaster, if you were, and talking about the big lie in the brewery industry and why breweries' survival depends on marketing. So without further ado, let me bring to the stage Mr. Grant. Good morning, Grant. How are you doing?
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Thanks for having me on the show. Appreciate it.
You're very welcome. And apologies, I need to get some pre-recorded applause lined up for when people come to the stage, just to make people feel welcome. Grant, you've been working with some of the big hitters of the beer industry over 20 years. But before we get diving into this conversation, could you maybe give us a little bit more detail around your background and how you've got to where you are, please?
Yeah, just really briefly. So after university in Scotland, I started working for Mars 1997 as a management trainee, spent 8 years at Mars. And then in 2005, I joined SAB Miller, which at the time was the second largest brewing group in the world. And I spent, pretty much 19 years working in marketing across Europe and eventually the world for what started as SAB Miller, and in 2017 became Asahi Group. So Asahi bought what was the former European business of SAB Miller. So I've worked across as a local marketing director in markets like Spain, Romania, Czechoslovakia, and then as the group CMO, I looked after all of Europe, which included the UK, Netherlands, Italy, of course, Poland, as well as the global brands, which, as you said earlier, included Peroni and Asahi, Pilsner Urquell, Grolsch, and Kozel. So it was a lot of fun. I finished up last year. I figured at age 50, it was time to improve my golf and maybe think about doing something else. But a great time in the brewing industry, no doubt about it.
And then I come knocking on your door on LinkedIn, trying to pull you back in for one last hurrah, at least a 40-minute chat where we get down and dirty with what marketing means to breweries. I do apologize.
No, it's okay. I mean, I don't think I'm the smartest, but I'm probably the most available. So here we are. Let's do our best.
You'll do, right? Grant will do it. It's fine. Okay, so Grant, you've like we say, you've worked with some of the real big hitters out there. In your opinion, like the title of the show is, what's the biggest lie that breweries have been led to believe about marketing?
So I'd say there's two things. So first of all, the brewing industry changed an awful lot in those 19, 20 years I was involved. The number of breweries, increased dramatically. UK market, as an illustration, there were probably a few hundred when I started working in the brewing industry, and there ended up well over 2,500. And I think there are two lies, if you want to call it that. Mostly they're lies to yourself, so not to others. The first one is, I don't need marketing because my products are good. And the second one, which is related to that, is that marketing is promotions, PR, communications, where in fact, I think most people over time understand marketing has at least 4 Ps. So the product, the price, the distribution, or the place, as we call it, and then only then at the end, the promotions. So I think people who've been unsuccessful in the industry find out too late that marketing is critical and that marketing is not communications. It's much more than that.
And so that first point, obviously, you say where marketing, we don't need to, the product's good enough. But where do you think that mindset has come from?
So I'm going to generalize now, but a lot of people who got into brewing the last years, not all, but a lot of them did it because they were passionate themselves about beer. They were passionate about the products. It was almost, this is my hobby and I'm going to make a business out of it. And therefore, they made products that they themselves enjoyed to drink, that them and their circle of friends. And therefore, they were sure that everybody thought like that as well. And everybody, once they tasted this beer that they enjoyed, would go, wow, that's it. I'm never looking back. I'm never drinking anything that I used to drink before. A terrible generalization, but I think that's where it begins. And then they're shocked to discover, one, it's not that easy. And two, quite a lot of people don't like your beer. They just don't. So, is this a product that you're marketing to the marketplace, or is it to yourself and friends? And that really comes to the fundamental question of, why are you getting into this? And there are only two answers. One, it's a hobby and a passion, but I have a real day job that pays for my mortgage, my children's education, etc. Okay, then you're probably fine. Make products you like for you and your friends. The second one is, I'm doing this because I want to pay my mortgage, look after my family, make myself financially secure. You better really understand the business then. Take this seriously. And maybe some of your assumptions are actually quite wrong. And so I think it starts with this view that this is a passion. So I'll treat it like a passion. And passion, I have my hobbies. You probably have yours. They're like black holes of money. Yeah, you lose money on them. I spend too much on golf clubs, right? It's not a profit thing.
I get it. And so that mind shift from hobby into professional, like you said, a lot of these brewers, it just gets out of hand, I suppose. It just grows and they're like, yeah, okay, now it's a business. Where do they begin? You talked about the 4 Ps earlier on, but like, what's the first rung on the ladder to them going, okay, we need to understand what marketing is and how to do it properly?
Well, I think in any industry, you have to understand the marketplace, which means the consumers and the people who use your product, in this case, the drinkers. What do they really like and why do they like it? Because there are trends in the marketplace, but then there's a core business. The core business is standard lager in every country in the world, including the UK. UK is quite diversified because you do have, traditional ales, you have craft beer, you have stouts. Nevertheless, 2/3 of the market is lager. So that's the market you operate in. So understanding and being really clear about what people, real people, your business, what they actually want to drink. I think that's the first point, as opposed to what you would like to drink, or you and your small circle of passionate friends, and figuring out, which one of them is a commercial idea and which one of them is a passion product. So you start with that, and then you find points of distinctiveness. So if you are in a marketplace where there's only 1 or 2 competitors, maybe you don't have to be particularly different because there's enough space, right? But when you have 2,500 breweries where more than half of them are doing kind of the same thing, it's very tough, but very important to be distinctive, stand out, get noticed, in simple terms. And I think thinking more clearly about that is important. And then, of course, the third one, which is so obvious, but it sometimes hits people hard, is you can have a good product and nice brand idea, but if it's not distributed, if people cannot find it, you're not going to sell anything. What is your distribution strategy? Again, if you're very, very small and it's one location, nothing to worry about. If you're going to build a brewery and you need some scale, you need to think quite carefully how you're going to do that.
And so if you say, okay, well, for your brewery to survive, you've got to double down on what the mass consumer wants, like you say, lager, there must be other cases of where a more craft or independent brewery can thrive and survive. So what's the difference there between the likes of a Brewdog making it big or a Beavertown making it big? And I know they are big corporate craft breweries against the likes of a Peroni, which is lager focused.
Yeah, it's a good point. So I don't think you need to be a lager to succeed. And actually, many of the examples I think about that succeed don't have a lager. I think what lager gives, you have to ask yourself a question before that. Why is lager the dominating category of beer? Is it just because it's cheaper? No, because in many cases, world beer, etc., it's not. It's because it's drinkable and refreshing. Okay, but there are people who want more flavors, more complexity. And that's where you see, let's call them easier drinking IPAs or ales are a perfect example of that, or much more flavorsome lagers. That's the space that craft can operate, because people have different definitions of craft. But for me, it's around offering a taste complexity which is higher than the standard lager that anyone would find in a particular market. There's an example here in Czech Republic. So there's a brand called Matuška, and they are extremely successful. They've been doing this 15 years. In fact, the brewmaster used to started working at Pilsner Urquell many years ago, learned his trade, and had this idea to do American-style beer, craft beer, which meant ales and IPAs, which at that time was extremely unusual here, very, very unusual. And he decided to, like a good business person, charge what was, by local standards, an extremely high price, triple the price of a regular beer. Because of that, every beer every beer they sell makes money. Very obvious. Are you actually making money from selling products? Yes. His market, he knew, was small, so he kept himself small, and he focused on one thing, which was IPAs and ales. Small range, 4 or 5 versions. The market is not huge for that, but if you're the only one in the market, or there's maybe 2 players, you make a good business. So you can definitely do that. If I look at the UK, in the last years, you do a non-alcohol beer. So you say, we're going to make crafted, flavorful, non-alcoholic beer. Why would you do that? Well, first of all, the non-alcohol beer market is growing rapidly. Secondly, there aren't that many players in it yet. There are a few, and the big guys are there, but there's still quite a lot of green space. So there, you can do it. But if you're coming to the UK now, for instance, saying, I've got a great idea, I'm going to do an IPA. Well, what would be your advice? Like, honestly, don't bother unless it's a hobby. It's just too difficult. And other people got there first. Brewdog got there first. And I think some of the breweries that were bought by the big brewers, of course, have had distribution. So the big brewers, what they bring to Beaverton or Camden Town is they bring awareness of what people want to drink. So what are the 1 or 2 products that we really focus on, regardless of how big the range is? And then distribution, availability, and with it, I guess, reasonable pricing. That allows them to make money on every beer because of the global procurement. And then you've got a virtuous circle. You make money, you can reinvest. You can reinvest into marketing, you can reinvest into machinery, etc. But if you don't make money, the whole thing isn't going to work, is it?
Mm-hmm. I want to come down back to the Beavertown comment in a little bit, but say a brewer has stumbled upon, they found their niche, they've created a product, or they've got a product that fills a gap. Like you say, if people don't know about it, and if they don't get the distribution, it's still not enough, is it? So we've ticked the box. We've got a unique product where there's very little competition. From your experience, what's the next steps? How are we getting that message out there, and how are we engaging with the consumer?
I mean, there's different roads. I think ideally, because you're not going to, there's 3 kinds of media, as we would call it in marketing. There's the obvious paid one. You buy space, advertising space. Second one is owned. So you own your own social media channels. You own a pub, it might be a location where you can then exclusively talk about yourself to consumers. And then third one is earned, which is you do interesting things, you say interesting things, and other people talk about you and spread the word. The most famous one, of course, is Brewdog, right? So their whole marketing strategy. So their marketing strategy is to trick the uninformed that we're not into marketing. At the same time, being the most successful marketeers in beer in the last 15 years in the UK market by heavily using the traditional and modern, to be fair, principles of marketing, being outrageous, getting other people to write about you. And therefore seeing it. Now, that's quite hard. You don't have to be outrageous, by the way, but you do have to do something that's worth talking about. Now, this is a delicate topic because entrepreneurs always believe their product, their service is fantastic and worth talking about. As an objective observer, sometimes you have to say it isn't. It's another IPA. There's 2,000 in the UK. Unless you've got an angle to that, which is worth, a story worth telling. So if you're a non-alcohol beer at the moment, you only do that, it's an angle. It's an angle that people are going to talk about. Hey, look at these guys doing non-alcohol beer. Isn't that funny? In 10 years, it's not going to be funny. It's going to be huge business, right? But today it's an interesting angle. But another IPA 15 years ago was an interesting subject. Now it's not. So you've got to do something remarkable, something that's worth remarking about. And that distinctiveness doesn't have to be naturally unbelievably unique, but it has to be something that someone else can't talk about. And please, 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 has to be simple and memorable. Yeah. So when you get something this long, which explains the hopping regime and how they did it, ain't no one remembering that next day. Heck, they're not remembering it 1 hour from now. Mm-hmm. It's got to be a memorable thing, you know. Beer for punks. Like it, you don't like it. You can kind of remember it.
And the whole BrewDog thing, of course, there are a lot of independent brewers out there saying that the likes of, you know, BrewDog, Beavertown, Camden, the big brewers now in the craft brewery scene, that's almost the death, or, you know, they're taking over the taps. How are we ever going to get a chance? Do you see it that way, or have you got a different perspective on it?
Well, I think it makes it very tough for them, indeed, right? It's like if you were a stout player in Ireland or the UK, you could say the same thing about Guinness. They've destroyed the stout market for us because they're so good at what they do. But I guess I'd come back to my second comment, because they're so good at what they do. If they were crap, if the product was disappointing, if they were overpricing it, if they were annoying people, there would be a gap in the market. But the fact is they're probably doing a damn good job. And that's annoying and frustrating, but, you know, that's business. So I'm not saying there aren't gaps in the market, but these big 3 or 4 craft brewers now, which have equity funding behind them, have done a good job with the products. So they've made the products drinkable. They've made them more mass market appealing, which will annoy people from the core of craft. Yeah, that will annoy them no end. But for the mass market, that's more attractive proposition. They've got the distribution through their pubs or their bars, at least, you know, better, also in the supermarket. So they've done already, you know, the product and the place well. The pricing will be, I'm not exactly sure the pricing, but probably within reason. Mm-hmm. So they're able to price to the consumer at a level which is okay. And because of their global procurement, etc., they'll be able to make money on every pint. So they'll make money, which will keep the business healthy. And then the promotion is probably the thing they've focused on the least, I would suggest. So the other 3 Ps have been what's driving the success of those. Promotion in BrewDog has been, in my opinion, up and down. I like some stuff I didn't like at all. And I think that's probably what the market would say. But still, they do remarkable things you want to talk about, which has kept them in the news headlines pretty smartly.
Mm. So you're saying about the placement side of things and awareness of the brand. Do you think awareness is more important than loyalty? Because you've got a lot of, you know, craft breweries and independent breweries who double down on their memberships, or just trying to get people repeating, coming to the tap rooms and stuff. What's your take?
I mean, I think what we know from global marketing science, but also practically my experience, is there isn't really any loyalty in this category. So people have a repertoire of brands, 6 to 8, which is constantly in their mind as acceptable choices. Their decision at the point of purchase, whether it's retail or in a bar or pub restaurant, depends on availability, pricing, and what their friends or what the occasion might be. But no one only drinks one beer all the time. It just doesn't happen. It's a myth. And especially in craft, part of the joy for the traditional hardcore craft consumer has been exploration. So I want to try new things as opposed to loyalty. They may have a repertoire of, again, 5 or 6 that they come back to frequently, but it's not true loyalty in the sense of that word, where, let's take a different example, iPhone. I have had an iPhone since 2009, I think, and I'm going to get a new one next year. I know already I'll buy an iPhone. I don't care what Samsung or anyone else produces, what innovation or what. I'm just, for different reasons, I'm just going to buy an iPhone. That's loyalty, right? As opposed to, you know, what we think about in beer. So the most important thing you need to think about is growing your consumer base all the time. People will drop out. You need to get people to come in. So we call it, in fancy words, penetration, right? So bringing in more people, making your brand as accessible as possible to as many people as possible. That's the marketing strategy, yeah? Not to go niche and pray for loyalty, because that doesn't work.
So what about, there's a lot of breweries who are told and do double down on like location side of things. Like, we are the brewery of this space. Is that broad enough, or are they shooting themselves in the foot there?
Look, it depends on the size of their business and their ambitions. So it can be, if you're in a certain town, let's call it a town, a geography, and your positioning is around, we make great beers for the people of this town, and that's compelling there. And you've done the numbers, and the numbers say, yeah, if we sell a certain market share in this town at a certain price, we can make money. Then yeah, it is. Of course it is. If you think that's a national idea or a big scale idea, it's probably not, is it? So Brewdog were from my hometown, from Aberdeen, right? And it was never hidden, but it's in the background. It's not their core brand proposition, the beer from Aberdeen, So I think geography, depending on your scale of business ambitions, can be effective or limiting.
So I'm sure, I hope that the tides are turning and more brewery owners understand or know that there is value in branding and marketing. But why do you think so many still struggle to embrace it? Like, is it because it's hard or it's unknown? And what do you think is going on in their minds?
Well, I'm going to guess three things. It is hard. It's probably what most of them haven't experienced. So they may be brewers. They've maybe trained themselves to do brewing. Maybe they've got good finance background. I don't know. But they may not have had a marketing background. I think it's also seen as a bit of a dark art. That's what people who don't make good products have to do. Yeah, that's what big brewers have to do, because ... they don't have good products, which it fails to understand the fundamental first and most important element of marketing is the product. So I think it's seen as a sort of nasty thing. And look, we've seen it repeated over time, so in the early days of Amazon, Jeff Bezos said, what is it? Advertising is like a tax on bad products or something like this. Well, he's fundamentally changed his mind because they're now one of the world's biggest advertisers. Elon Musk, I'm not doing, all these people, because it sounds good, it sounds cool, makes you seem like a cool person. It's just not true. And it's just not what they believe long term. Brewdog said similar things. We'll set our money on fire before we advertise, or some words to that effect. And we're definitely advertising now because it works and it drives business, right? So I think it's seen as a bit of a dark art. I think it's hard because marketing, if you ask anyone who works in marketing in any business, they'll tell you that when the guy talks about supply chain, there's only a couple of people who have an opinion. When the guy comes up about international tax regimes, there's only 1-2 people have an opinion. When the guy comes up or girl comes up to talk about marketing, everyone in the room's got an opinion. Everyone, all 500 of them. So you're in a function or a discipline where from the outside it looks like it's just about making funny ads, and I've got an opinion about that because it's cultural. There's an artistic part to it, but professional marketing is a bit different to that.
And so, we talked about we touched on earlier on that there are breweries dropping out of the sky at the moment, closing left, right, and center. And one reason might be them not embracing and understanding that they have to market in order to sell and evolve. Is there a point where it almost becomes too late? Like if they've suddenly realized, we really need to do some marketing, can they pull back from the edge of the cliff? Or if they're already at that
because again, let's think what marketing is. Marketing is, all right, what would you do? Let's say you went to a brewery who wasn't making money, was losing money, and was therefore on the borderline, financial knife edge, right? Do we close? Do we keep going? You come back and ask some fundamental questions. Okay, you're doing this as a business, not a hobby, so you want to make money. All right, what's the market you're in? Have you actually done proper market analysis? So what's the potential for you? How are you going to get distribution? What is your pricing model such that it's fair for the consumer and the customer, but also you make money? Have you done that? So before we get into fancy promotions and PR stories and all that, let's just talk about the fundamentals. And maybe the products need to change. Maybe the geography needs to change. yeah, this one town is not big enough. There's 8,000 people in this town. It isn't going to work, guys, unless you're selling one tank of beer, So I think you go and look at the fundamentals. I think there are always opportunities, even in saturated markets. But you have to be very distinctive, as I said, and you have to be very simply and memorably distinctive that people can repeat. This is the brand with the X that it just elevates you above the others. So it's possible. It's possible.
But I suppose they've got to take a cold, hard look at themselves, and there's got to be a lot of self-discovery, especially for the smaller breweries, where you're like, okay, what I love, I need to change and do something that's more appealing.
Potentially. Yeah. And then I think it's obviously a fundamental question. Is that then what I want to do? Because I got into this because I love to make these products. The marketplace doesn't value those products enough, or there's other people doing it as well. Do I want to change, what I do, or give up? Because actually my principle is I just want to make these kind of things. Nothing wrong with that, yeah. But then you have to admit it's probably not a big business idea.
Yeah. It's interesting, that whole, I'm just trying to think if there's comparisons with other industries, and there's got to be the divide between hobby and business, but I just can't think of any that spring to mind right now. But it's a lot of people that, they are taught, and the idea of chase your dream and, do what you want to do, and like kind of.
I suppose any art, I mean, think about, I know nothing about this. I'm just throwing things like clothes. Yeah. So you have the big clothes companies, and people want to make more sustainable clothes or fashion that fits a certain figure type or mindset. And that's what you and your friends, because you have a circle of friends who think kind of alike, and you think there's a market for that. And maybe it's just much more difficult than you think to source materials, to get them made, to, run a shop. It's tough, And Victoria Beckham was losing money, right? And she had quite a big name to put out there. So it's a hard job to do. I think bakeries, if you want to make, I don't know, sourdough bread or these kind of better baking, better for you, or bakery artisanal products, I think it's definitely a market in growth, but there's probably a lot of other people doing it as well, etc. It's a similar kind of thing where you're probably right. There's a market for these products. It may not be as big as you think it is, given pricing and other features,
So apart from bigger budgets and more people, what are the big brands doing that almost the smaller ones seem to ignore or refuse to acknowledge?
So I guess, the big brewers, the criticism that's thrown at them, which is received on the other side as a compliment, by the way, is, someone says, "Oh, you're very Scottish." I think, "Oh, thank you very much." So they say, "You're very focused on business." And the big brewers go, "Yeah, thank you very much." So in other words, they buy a craft brewery. They say, right, which of the products are the ones which have more broad appeal? In other words, they have enough flavor and complexity, but they're much more drinkable. Yeah, so whether that's a lager, an aromatic lager, whether that's a session IPA, something like this, because they know the market for those products is 5 times bigger than the markets for an 8% imperial stout. Then they get distribution. So they say, all right, to make this work, we need to be in 1,000 bars, pubs to begin with, in certain locations, parts of this city, parts of that city, etc. Pricing, we need to look at the pricing that the consumer will pay, because again, it's very basic this, but if you ask people if they like something, it's unreliable unless you say, do you like it for this price? So the sourdough bread, is £6, and the basic white loaf is whatever it is, 50p. So the question is not, do you like the sourdough? The question is, do you like it at that price? And I think Guinness has been extremely successful because it's not expensive in the UK. Yeah, and then you come here, Guinness is like triple the price, quadruple the price of a beer. So of course, it's just off the scale. So I think that part is probably underestimated. The pricing they get right, the distribution they get right, the product they get right. And therefore, those are like the basics. They're the non-sexy parts of marketing in a way. But those are the things before they get onto the promotion. So I think I don't want to criticize the small brewers because it's quite hard to get the pricing in that level because you're not going to be able to buy the materials, the raw materials and the packaging and other things at the same cost as the big guys, so they have a scale advantage. Distribution in the UK depends on the market, but in the UK it's quite tricky, isn't it? Because you've got these big closed shops, if you want to call them those. But there are places, particularly in retail. The products, I think people need to do more work, and certainly on the promotion, you have to make that P work harder for you. Then it's back to being distinctive, and because maybe consumer sentiment is more on your side. So you're a small player, family-run business, whatever, versus big brewer, probably sentiments in your favor, but only if you leverage it, only if you say something interesting beyond, please help us because we're a small brewer. Well, people in a pub will say, yes, we will, because they want to be nice to you, but then they'll go and purchase something else,
Yeah, I get it. And you were saying, obviously, like what was the analogy you said about selling a house, wasn't it? It's like, oh, buy my house because it's
I think it's just easier when you talk about a category that's not your own. You say to yourself, look, does it matter to you, really, if you're honest, the clothes that you've bought, are they from a small family-run business or a big player? If you're honest with yourself, in the last 5 years of all the sneakers, clothes you've bought, how many of you deliberately said, I'm not buying that because it's from a big supplier? Buy a house. Do you care if it's from a large-scale house builder, big company, or Bob and Sally, small sellers? Does it really matter to you in your choice? I'm not sure that for most people it does. Cars. Do you care if it's a small, bespoke, British-based? For some people, sometimes it matters, but the mass market says, hell no. Give me the nice car for the fair price,
Okay, so I would imagine we've got some brewers who will be listening to this or listening now. And by the way, if anyone's got any questions, please do drop them in the comments field. We'll respond to them in a bit. But we've got the cost to brew beer increasing day by day, especially very recently. You've got people trying to shrink their staff to make ends meet, and they're like working every hour of the day. And here we are saying, yeah, but you've got to invest in researching your market and what your positioning is, and then of course marketing and standing out. Like, where does that sit in the hierarchy of things when we've got brewers going, we just don't have time for any of it? Like,
I think you don't necessarily need a lot of money to do the investment piece, but if you're going to run a business, you need to understand the market you operate in. So you can do this by observation. Go to the bars, ask people what's selling, what's not selling, which one has been selling more, which one has been selling less. What do people come back for? There's ways that it doesn't cost you any money, but you just need to get out of your comfort zone. So go to places that you think are not good beer or not, but they're big pubs, they sell a lot of beer. Oh, it's all mainstream lager. Yeah, that's what you need to understand, because if you want to grow the category of craft, you need to convert people from something. Yeah, they're not going to probably be converted from Coca-Cola. They're going to be converted from mainstream beer. So you need to understand what would convert them, what they like about those things, what's the pricing. So there's pieces, they can do. There's a lot of stuff available online. You go to like Morning Advertiser, there's quite a lot of good insights. There's good writers, there's knowledgeable people there. Just actually read up on it. And then always talk to a cynic. If you run a business, talk to someone who thinks it's not a good idea and says, your beer's all right, but there's others like it. They'll annoy you like hell, but they'll force you to ask, so what's different about it? And how do you, someone who's not a beer geek, not an expert, but is in the category. I think so there's definitely stuff you can do without spending a lot of money. You just need to do a little bit more. You just need to understand a little bit more how the business works, how the industry works, realistically.
Okay, so like if we try and summarize some of these key points that you've been suggesting here, it is about being more aware of the bigger audience, of the bigger consumer, and what the trends are and what people are looking for. Having a distinct offering, something that you say is remarkable in terms of marketing in terms of their language. We haven't really overly touched on the identity side of things. From a visual side of things, is that important to have a visual standout, or would you say it's more around the positioning and the narrative and the offering?
Well, I mean, I think the brand identity, as we would call it, is ultimately at the last part of the consumer journey. It's at the point where they decide to buy or not, whether that's in a retail outlet or in a bar where you have, in the UK, you have those tap handles, which can make a very, very big difference. So a very high number of decisions, final purchase decisions, are made in the outlet. Yeah, so people get there. So the category decision might be made. I want a refreshing beer. Okay. But you go there, it's a bunch of choice. I don't want those mainstream. I want something with more flavor. And there's 2 or 3 offerings. It's undisputably true that the clarity and attractiveness of your design can trigger purchase or not. And myself, I don't claim at all to be an expert on, the traditional kind of cask ale in the UK, right? For me, it's just, wow, it's a very interesting but bizarre world. So because I know nothing about it, when I go into them, I just entirely choose on the labels. I read what's there. What is it? What's the alcohol? Does it look interesting? And I try it. And I'm not alone. So it's incredibly important. I think generally speaking, and again, this is a generalization, but a lot of the craft guys have gone into making labels that look cool, but they're not effective. Effective is a very different point. Effective means, does it give the consumer the reason to pull the trigger to purchase? Is it clear? Is it simple? And does it explain what it is? It's always the who, what, why. Who am I? Your brand. What is it? Session IPA, 3.4%, whatever. Why? Looks good. And I think they focus a lot on why, make it look beautiful. We've employed graphic designers and local artists. Okay, but I don't know what it is, or who are you? So some of them do it very well. So let me say it's very different, right? Some of it I think is really nice. Some of it I find attractive artistically, but I don't think it's good commercially.
And do you think it's damaging almost in that respect to chase trends in certain ways? Because you're always going to be second best or well, at best second best because someone's done it before you. Like my example being, everyone knows Beavertown is the skulls illustration kind of rad kind of idea, but you see them pop up all over the place in terms of replicas. And do you think that's damaging, or do you think that's a good thing for their brand?
Well, I think if you're the market leader who's famous for something and someone else tries to copy you, it's only good news. So we had the brand Pilsner Urquell here in Czech. It's by far the strongest brand with the strongest brand recognition and very strong identity. And every few years, some competitor will appear and try and copy some of the design elements in order to make themselves look like they're a premium beer. And when we analyze and we ask consumers about the advertising, so they see a billboard or whatever, more than half of them think it's an ad for Pilsner Urquell. So you're basically helping me advertise my brand. Thank you. So I think it's just not smart. It doesn't hurt Beaverton in this example. It helps them. I think chasing trends is just not a good marketing strategy. You have to understand the trends, but then you have to produce a product which looks timeless in a way and let the trends come to you. Yeah. So I think trying to do trendy marketing is an absolute classic mistake. We've all done it and all regretted it, right? Never do that.
I think it's easier to do these days, especially with social media marketing. And when I see a brewery jumping on a trend, no matter what it is, I'm just like, oh, that's a shame. Because what are they telling you? They're trying to keep up. It's yeah, but where's the substance? If anything,
give me an example. What do you mean?
So you've got the Gen Z language. So try and get someone to talk to talk as a Gen Z or even earlier, and describe the brewery. And it's just but that's not your brewery.
Yeah.
It doesn't sound right. It doesn't come from a place that feels authentic. It's almost cheap.
Yeah, and it's completely unnecessary. So people don't want you to talk in as if you are them. You're not. You're a brand, and they know that, and they're okay with that, right? So it's a mistake. Yeah.
Okay, so let's pull out the crystal ball and rub that thing super hard. And as we look ahead for 2025, it's quite a tumultuous time, I suppose, for everyone. But what do you see on the horizon for brewery specifically? What's coming up? What do you think will shape the industry in the next year or so?
Well, next year, I don't know, but the next year is no secrets here. So non-alcohol beer, I'm a huge fan. I've lived in countries where it's 10 to 15% of the market and growing. UK, it's 1. That thing's going to grow 500 to 1,000% the next decade. So non-alcohol beer is not only here to stay, it's here to reshape the category. So all bets on that are good bets. As always, what will happen is the market will flood with people and the key winners will emerge. But, if you look at, Guinness Zero, Peroni Zero, which I helped develop, extremely successful, takes a very, very high share of the brand sales already. So that's a big one. I think mid-strength beers. So what I would say is 3.5% plus minus. There's also, in the UK, there's obviously a taxation reason for that. But even outside of the UK, that's just a sweet spot for people where it's the lightest way to get, enjoying beer. You look historically, of course, a lot of cask ale, a lot of the traditional beer in UK was at that level. Yeah, that's the history. It's only the last 30 years it's got strong, if you like. I think that mid-strength will be extremely powerful. And then the third one I would say is flavored. So I know, again, for some purists, beer and lemons, what the hell? But there's a history in the UK of shandy, we called it, right? They called it in the continent radlers, beer for cyclists, things like this. I think flavored has huge potential because flavored soft drinks are losing credibility. Yeah. So high sugar and lots of other things in them. So I think a lot more adults are looking for alternatives, and brewed or fermented products, whether they're kombucha or beer based, I think have a very bright future. So I would be putting my bets on that stuff.
That's probably going to be like the three things that most brewers are going, I don't want to do that. I want to make a triple IPA, double IPA, New England IPAs, hop forwards, hazies.
And I think that market will be okay to stable. Yeah, it's just there's so many people doing it.
Yeah.
So if you think about lagers, how many lagers are there in the UK? 100, 200? How many good non-alcohol lagers are there? 5. So you're part of an exclusive crew in a market that's growing. So definitely people will drink triple hopped IPAs and imperial stouts. Absolutely. It's not a very big growth market and there's a lot of people already doing it. So back to the points we've been discussing, you better have something up your sleeve that's a bit special or unique.
I think that's a really fantastic way to wrap this chat. Thank you, bud. If people did want to engage with you in conversation, or indeed ever any point try and pick your brains when you're not on the golf course, like, can people follow along with your ramblings or connect with you anyway, Grant?
Yeah, my ramblings are mostly confined to the household and the pub, so I don't like have any social media presence in that respect. But you can find me on LinkedIn, and if people, I guess there's 2 points. One is at the moment I do consultancy work, not for breweries, but for other businesses, retailers and stuff. If they want any help, professional, then I'm willing to engage. But if they want a quick chat, I'm also happy. So they can reach out through probably LinkedIn is the best one.
Fantastic, my man. Well, Grant, once again, thank you so much for your time this morning, bud. I think it's been a really valuable conversation, and I hope people have picked up a couple of bits and bobs that they're going to be going away and seriously thinking about, my man. Everyone else.
All right, Tim. Thanks a lot. It's been fun.
It has. Everyone else, thanks for listening. And until next time, take care of yourselves. Rock on.